Hello friends, in today's video, we will discuss the environmental ethics, issues and possible solutions. First of all, what is environmental ethics? Environmental ethics concerns human beings' ethical relationship with natural environment. So when we come to different aspects related to environment, certain moral principles are to be applied in all these aspects. And in environmental ethics, we will look into these moral principles and ethical perspectives related to environmental provisions. Environmental ethics deals with issues related to the rights of individuals that are fundamental to life and well-being. These human rights related to environment are often considered in environmental ethics. And this concerns not only the needs of each person of today, but also those who will come after us, the coming generations' rights, then the rights of other living creatures. So all these rights are considered in the environmental ethics, not just the human rights of the present generation, a holistic picture of the human rights of different categories are considered in environmental ethics. When we look into the environmental ethics, different issues related to environmental ethics, in today's session, I will be mentioning 5 different dimensions related to environmental ethics, ethical perspectives that we should consider. First of all, the resource consumption patterns and the need for their equitable utilization. So when we look into the environmental resources that are consumed by people and the environmental impact that is suffered by the people, we see a great divide. For example, often the rich people are enjoying the provisions of environmental protection and the good features of the environment, and the environmental impact often made by them will be suffered by the poor people. So we often see a huge inequality between rich and poor when we look into the various environmental provisions. So here is a picture from one of the Indian streets in Mumbai. Here on one side we have the richer section who have a greener side. They are actually planting trees and they are often thought to be protecting environment. And on the other side we have the poor section. There is no greenery there. So you might think they are not eco-friendly, the so-called eco-friendly. But often these richer group are producing much more waste than this poor group. And they might be dumping all these waste onto the other side, making their side clean and green, and the other side cannot maintain and enjoy the goodness of the environment, and they are making minimum harm to the environment in fact. So in one of the studies that was made by Mr. Anil Agarwal as part of the Status of India report, some of the points that was mentioned in this study is worth noticing. For example, environmental destruction is largely caused by the consumption of the rich. But the worst sufferers of the environmental destruction are the poor people. So there is a great disparity between rich and poor when it comes to environmental related matters. Even where nature is being recreated, as in afforestation, it is being transformed away from the needs of the poor and towards those of the rich. For example, in an urban city, suppose if a mini forest is being developed, who will be enjoying all those features of the nature, all the greenery? Rich people will be coming there to enjoy the greenery. But the poor people will have to suffer from all the waste that are made by the rich people. And even among the poor, the worst sufferers are the marginalized cultures and occupations, and most of all women. And there cannot be a proper economic and social development without a holistic understanding of society and nature. So the ethical aspects has to be applied into this picture of this great inequality between rich and poor in the environmental matters. If we care for the poor, we cannot allow the gross nature product. Gross nature product simply means the sum total of all the benefits that we get from nature, and the gross nature product to be destroyed any further, and that should be done if we care for the poor. conserving and recreating nature has become the highest priority. Gross nature product will be enhanced only if we can arrest and reverse the growing alienation between the people and the common property resources. In this, we will have a lot to learn from our traditional cultures. And it is totally inadequate talk only of sustainable rural development as the World Conservation Strategy does. We cannot save the rural environment or rural people dependent on it unless we can bring about sustainable urban development. So when we come to different aspects related to this rich-poor divide, we must consider the lives of the poor and how the lives are affected by various urban developments. So not only this sustainable development must be brought into the rural environment, it should also be brought into the urban environment. So this study actually identifies the inequality between rich and poor in various matters relating to environment. And the gross nature product must be distributed between rich and poor equally. Development must consider that these natural resources are distributed between rich and poor in an equal manner. Now the second dimension to this environmental ethics that we will be thinking today is the disparity between northern and southern countries. There is a great north-south divide between rich industrialized nations of North America and Europe as against the needs of developing countries of the south, such as in South and Southeast Asia and South America. So we will see in the next slide this great divide existing between the northern continents and the southern continents and the southern countries. People living in the economically advanced nations use greater amounts of resources and energy per individual and also waste more resources. This is at the cost of poor people who are resource dependent and live in developing nations. So if you look into this picture, this is a world map and you can see an imaginary line drawn here dividing the northern countries with the southern countries. Australia is also included with the north. So you can see 20% of the population in these countries owns 80% of the wealth in the north. Whereas in the southern countries, 80% of the population lives and they own just the 20% of the wealth. And who will be exploiting the resources to the maximum extent? This richest section will be exploiting the natural resources. For example, the carbon dioxide emission is more from these northern countries, from USA, Europe, China, etc. More carbon dioxide is being emitted. But who is suffering the brunt of global warming? The poor people will be suffering because maybe the developed nations will make arrangements for alternate mechanisms. The people will buy AC if heat is increasing, but the poor people will have no options but to live with this environmental impacts. So there is a great inequality between the north and the south when it comes to environmental related matters. So as in this cartoon, we can see the northern hemisphere is more economically developed and they are producing more waste. The poor people are often usually living in the southern countries and they are actually suffering from all the threats of environmental pollution. The third dimension that we have to think about is the urban-rural equity issues. The common properties of the rural communities has increasingly been used to supply the needs of the urban sector. So often the rural will be supplying all the natural resources to the urban area. They will be exploiting maximum, and what will they give back in return? Maybe they will give back waste and other environmental threats in return. So as you can see, they might be emitting a lot of emissions as water polluting agents or environmental polluting agents. So the rural people will have to suffer all these threats from the environment, but the good things will be taken up by the urban side. Resources of the rural sector are being depleted, and while cities are getting richer, the rural sector, especially the landless, are getting poorer. So there is a great disparity between the urban people and the rural people when it comes to environmental matters. Often when we talk about environmental protection, we say that we should provide awareness to the rural people. Actually, the rural people are living in maximum harmony with the nature. The urban one, the so-called educated people of the urban area are actually making more environmental pollution. But who is suffering more? The rural people are suffering more. So there is a great equity issue which should be considered from the ethical perspective between the urban and rural people. And fourth dimension, we will be considering a great disparity between men and women. So often due to the various patterns that we have in the society, due to the particular structure of the society, in almost every culture, women are the providers of the family, not the providers in the money sense. Women are actually responsible for providing food for the family, providing water, medicine and other basic facilities of the family are to be ensured by the women. Men will be working outside and maybe providing the financial support, and at the local level, women have to find food, water, medicines, etc., the fuel, wood for burning, etc. For example, if there is a water scarcity, who will be collecting water for the family? Women will be usually seen collecting water for family when there is a water scarcity. So with this, women have to find these natural resources from the nature, but who is actually controlling these resources? We often see men at the decision making levels. So who should control the environmental resources of the rural community? Unfortunately, it is often men who plays a decisive role. But usually, we should also include women in these decision making roles with regard to environmental related matters, because they are at the ground level facing with realities of scarcities of resources and other basic threats. So there should be an inclusiveness between men and women when it comes to decision making process, and men should also be included in the local or the ground level where these threats of environmental pollution are being faced. There is a great divide between women and men. The great divide between women and men is most apparent in communities that live near forests, and how by tradition made the women play a great role than men in collection of natural resources. So since women are made to collect natural resources due to the specific structure of the society, there is a divide between men and women while suffering the environmental impacts. And hence, for many of the environmental movements such as Chipko movement, we usually see women folk at the forefront because they may be suffering the most out of the environmental impacts. For example, in the Chipko movement, we saw women hugging trees because women know if these trees are gone, they cannot find the fuel, they cannot find the water, and these trees forms their basics of their livelihood. So men might not know these basic things, and women are often seen at the forefront. So women must also be included in the decision making process, and this great inequality between men and women for environmental related matters must be addressed. And in the fifth dimension, as the fifth point, we will be considering the great inequality between the current generation and the future generation. Often the current generation exploit the nature for all the benefits. And what we leave behind a world that is devoid of forest. Forests are gone, the pure water is gone, the air quality is getting lost, getting depleted, the ozone is getting depleted. Then what else? The soil is getting polluted. So all the resources that we have in nature is getting used up by the current generation, and we leave behind a nature, we leave behind the sufferings of all these environmental impacts. Can we use up all the resources of the world, leaving nothing for our future generations? If we overuse and misuse resources and energy from fossil fuels, our future generations would find survival much more difficult. So just as our ancestors have left resources for us, it is our duty to leave them behind for our future generations. These unborn people have a right to these resources. So as we have seen, there is a great divide between the present generation who is using up all the resources and the future generation who will have no resources left and who will have to face with these environmental impacts in the coming generation. So this inequality has also to be studied under environmental ethics. This issue has to be addressed with highest moral principles. So when it comes to development strategies, we should not overlook the sustainable methods. We should use these resources in such a way that future generations, the rights of the future generations are protected. So a sustainable development has to be made when it comes to development. So in this lecture, we have looked into various environmental ethical perspectives. We have seen 5 particular issues of great inequality: the rich-poor divide, the north-south divide, the urban-rural inequality, the men-women inequality, and the present generation and future generation inequality. So these are some of the dimensions of the ethical perspective, environmental ethics. We need to address these issues, these inequalities, these injustice that is existing while enjoying the environmental benefits and facing the environmental threats. So I hope this portion is clear for you. Thank you.